Good day. The sun's shining. Yeah, sort of. And it's a good day for tearing into a motorcycle engine. I wanted to give you a close-up of what we're doing here today. We're tearing off the, for the moment, we're tearing off the inner and outer cam valve, the valve covers. So I've got one already done. This is where we're headed. We're going to get the cover off. There's an inner and an outer cover, and we need to gain access to this part of the motor before we eventually take off the valve assembly here on top, and then continue into the bottom of it. Here's the original covers in place. I wanted you to be able to see a close-up of before and after. You've got 4 bolts that hold the outer cover on. The outer cover is nothing but a piece of blow molded plastic. So when you do take your bolts loose, it might want to stick. Pry on it gently so you don't actually break the thing. When you pull one of these bolts out here, I'll go ahead and take one out to show you. Once you get it out, there is underneath it this nifty little flat washer. See it? Don't lose it. You'll need it later. See if I can manage to get it out now. Okay. Always a proper tool for the job. There we go. Now you can see that there's not much to it. It's a very thin washer. And you've got one in each, so don't lose them as you're pulling the outer cover off. I'll spare you the other 3 bolts. Let me pull that off, and then I'll show you what you've got holding the inner cover on. As I do all of this, I mark bags and label them, so I know what this stuff is a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now, whenever I get all my parts in and start to reassemble. Real good idea to do that, unless you're just somebody who can remember this stuff off the top of your head. All these bags that I'm using here, these are all recycles from a place I used to work. They would put parts in the bag, take it out to the floor for assembly on a machine, and then they would go promptly into the county landfill, which to me didn't make very much sense. So I've been saving them for years, so I've got a pile of them. Alright, I'm going to stop the video for just a moment, get the outer plastic cover off here. Actually, I think I'll put it on the tripod and you guys can watch me pull that off, and then we'll get to the inner valve cover, which is located right here. Alright, we're back. So, as promised, we have 4 of these bolts to pull off. Washer on each. Make sure you get the washer. And as I mentioned before, tag them and bag them. It's no fun when you're getting near the end of a project trying to reassemble and you're hunting for parts that should be right at your fingertips. Okay, sometimes the cover will stick. Don't be surprised if it does, because it makes contact on these 4 points. It can tend to get stuck down. Inner valve cover. The manual points out that the washers that are under these have 2 sides to them. A rubber side, which is pure rubber, and then the other side, which is slightly rubberized, but you can see the steel through it. You can see the metal. The metal is supposed to be facing up against the underside of the fastener. So if you've got them upside down like this, first of all, they're not going to seal very well, but that's also an indication someone's been in there. There are 3 of these fasteners that hold the inner cover on. Since we're doing a complete rebuild, all my rubber parts are going to get replaced, so not too concerned if I misplace one, but just in case. All those go in the bag. Here we go. Alright, the inner cover has a hole here for accessing the spark plug. That spark plug is in the bottom of a well. If there wasn't some way to isolate that area, you'd have oil everywhere on top and around the plug, which of course you can't have. So there's a tube in there. When you go to pull this off, it's going to stick. It's going to feel like it doesn't want to come off. Just keep gently wiggling and prying up. You'll eventually get it. And what you'll find is you've got a tube here, referred to, strangely enough, as a spark plug tube. It has 2 O-rings, a lower O-ring, if you pull it out of the cover, an upper O-ring. Okay? Those are going to get replaced as well. I don't think it makes a difference. However, I did notice that the way this was installed in the cover, there's a casting number on the part. The casting number is right side up, so the number begins, this is 1893, it begins with the 1 up into the inner valve cover. Okay, so that's the outer and inner valve covers. Again, everything gets labeled in the bag, so I will remember where it came from when I look at it later. We're going to be removing the camshaft next on both front and rear. They're nearly identical, not quite. First thing we have to do though is get the cover off of the alternator. Right here on this side of the engine, left side of the engine. And that's so that we can see the mark, the timing mark inside, and make sure it's in the right position when we disassemble it. So I'm going to put this back on the tripod. I just wanted to give you a close-up of that before I actually pull the cover. And yeah, so we'll do that next and move on from there. Alright, we're back. Hopefully this is going to be a good shot. Show you how to get your front cylinder to top dead center, which we need to do before we continue removing the camshaft. You got 3 8mm bolts holding the alternator cover on. I use an extension just because I don't like rubbing my knuckles in too close against stuff. And I've already loosened these, so they're only finger tight. Go ahead and pop these off. And with anything you do inside this engine, whenever you're prying, trying to loosen something, trying to get something free, if you're really struggling and it won't move, stop. You're probably doing something wrong, or something's still attached that you're not aware of. So I'm going to use gentle pressure to get this cover off. There we go. Came right to me. No problem. The manual also mentions to make sure that you keep track of the O-rings as they come off. We got an O-ring here and here, and I'm going to try and get a good close-up video of up inside the bore here to show you the timing mark. And rather than try to do that with the camera on the tripod, we're going to try a cell phone and see if I can do that. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it and then get it onto the TF mark, which is top dead center for the front cylinder. There's also a TR mark for top dead center on the rear cylinder. And we're going to do that one after a bit. We're going to do front cylinder first. Okay, so y'all heard me. Front cylinder first and counterclockwise. But that might be bigger than a 14. If I had to guess, and I do, let's say that might just be a 16 or 17. I'll try 17 first. Bingo. 17 it is. I'm using 1/2 inch drive for this because I don't feel like working myself to death. Counterclockwise. So now, I have to keep an eye in here looking for that timing mark. Oh, there went TR. We're going to be rotating the crankshaft by this 17mm bolt until we get the timing mark, TF for front cylinder, TR for the rear cylinder, around to this timing mark here, right there, which is built into the outer cover. So when TF is lined up with this, you're top dead center on the front cylinder. When it says TR, you're at top dead center on the rear cylinder. So that's done, and now we're ready to continue with removing the camshaft up top. So let's go from here to there. Okay, moving on with our camshaft removal. The cam chain tensioner bolt is the next item to come out. I'm switching to cell phone, unfortunately, because the El Cheapo video camera I got off Amazon has died after less than, I believe, 10 total hours of use. So I have to be able to see what I'm filming. You'll note that if you are on top dead center, by the way, on the front cylinder, you've got one other indication that you're there, and that's up here on the cam gear itself. It's got this beautiful white line etched in there with a couple of dots on it, but most importantly you can see the line, and the line is almost exactly parallel to the head. So not too much doubt you've got it in the right position then, as if TF didn't give it away for you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and pull this. The manual makes a point of saying do not attempt to rotate the crankshaft once you've got that loose, because you can end up damaging the cam chain tensioner body because it's free and loose in there once you take that pressure off. So don't do that. One of the things that the manual also mentions is that when you're pulling out the cam chain tensioner bolt, you're also going to be removing the spring. What they don't tell you is it's actually under quite a bit of pressure. Boink. So once you get it loose, that thing's coming out. And it's coming out pretty quick. So be aware that you've got a pretty good sized compressed spring in there, that's going to come out at you once you take it loose. I'm sure I read that, but it wasn't clicking until it popped in my hand. So I wanted to give you a close-up of that. Okay, let's see if I can get this. We're looking down inside the cam chain tunnel. In the foreground, out of focus, is the cam chain. I'm trying to keep my light. There we go. Down inside the tunnel, you're going to see not only the chain, but it's got a cam chain tensioner which is pressing up against the chain. You can see that. Beyond that, that serrated looking area, that is a stopper which has sort of like a ratchet effect, if you will. And I'm going to have to reach down in there with a screwdriver, 2 screwdrivers in fact, one to release the little cam that holds that piece of gray steel in the center against the serrations. When I press down on that, I'm going to use a second screwdriver and back the tensioner back out away from the chain. This releases the tension on the chain. I'm glad I was able to get this shot. Okay, so that's the next step. This is just on the inside of where we just removed the cam chain tensioner bolt. So you can understand how the bolt together with the spring pressure keeps pressure on this device. And that once the pressure is applied, the serrations and the little stopper work together to keep pressure maintained so it doesn't back off under load. Alright, that's next. Okay, well that was considerably easier than what I thought it was going to be. You can now see that it's been retracted. If I can get it to focus there. Sorry for the jumpy video. That's a tight spot. Now I've released the stopper and retracted the device that presses against the cam chain tensioner. This chain now is completely loose. It's loosey-goosey. See? Completely free. No tension on it. Okay, this is our camshaft tensioner bolt that I removed a little while ago. Manual calls for this to be reinstalled so that the tensioner does not fall down inside the crankcase. Now, again, this is a complete rebuild. We don't care if it falls down inside the crankcase because we can go after it later. I'd like to introduce you to one of my best friends in the world, the Sharpie. Okay, I mark everything. I don't count on my memory because my memory is going to fail me. Camshaft covers are marked R for rear, F for front, because they look identical, but I want to make sure they go back in the correct location after the fact. I don't believe they are exactly identical simply because of the fact the sprocket is on opposite sides. See that? So you want to make sure you get the right one in the right place. Okay, so next up, we're going to go ahead and pull these bolts, which of course I've cheated and pre-loosened. And then we're going to get this off of here, slip the cam chain off the sprocket, and remove the camshaft. Okay, I've got the camshaft cover bolts out, and I'm rocking it up out of position by using a screwdriver here and a screwdriver here and gently rocking back and forth. One thing I want to point out for sure, if you can see that, there is a dowel in there. And there's one on each end if I remember correctly. So you want to be sure that if you're not going into the crankcase, don't lose those. Okay, because you're going to have to chase them if you do. So just be careful, be slow, methodical. Okay? And we'll have this off in just a jiff. Okay, I've got the cover off, the cap off, excuse me. And I want to point out where the dowels are at. one here close to the camshaft sprocket. There's our camshaft. And then one over here on the other end of the cap. It's still inside the block. You can see it there. It's got oil sitting inside of it, so it looks like it's black on top of it, like a solid piece, but it's actually another dowel. Okay, our lovely little spark plug. There's our valves. Just wanted to point out where those dowels are at. Okay, I've got the camshaft out, and I've got it here in my hand. I'm a little concerned about this wear pattern on the end journal. It looks like the surface hardness is gone. Looks like a burn mark. So I may be out for a new camshaft before this is all said and done. Looking at the bearing seat, I see some wear marks that don't make me too happy. And I know a head is like several $100s, and that's not in the budget. So it may have to go back together just as it is. I see plenty of oil up here in the head. So I can't imagine it was starved for oil, except maybe at some point by the previous owner. I'm the second owner on the bike. So I want to point that out to you. You want to inspect this stuff. I inspected the teeth. They all look good. Chain itself doesn't show that much wear, but that bearing journal there does not look happy. Wanted to say a quick word about valve shims while I'm up in here. And I turned the light on here so it's a little easier to see. When you pull the camshaft cap off, the retaining cap off, and take your camshaft away, as the camshaft comes around, it's pressing, the lobes of the camshaft are pressing against the cam followers on the rocker arms. And the rocker arms at their tips are pressing down on the tops of the valves here. This is a valve shim. This one has been removed. This one right here has been removed. This is what they look like. Okay, it's just a machined little piece of steel, hardened steel, that gives you a precise clearance. You're supposed to have a precise clearance between the tip of the rocker arm and the top of the valve. This is what's called valve clearance or valve lash. And you have to adjust that, I think it's every 24,000 or 28,000 miles. In any event, I know mine has been done less than probably 6,000 miles ago, so I don't really want to redo this all over again. So I'm going to individually mark these as to where they came from, and then they're going to go inside of a container appropriately marked so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel when I go to put it back together. So I wanted to point that out. Don't lose those. Don't let them drop down inside. You will be hunting for them. And again, if you're not splitting the crankcase like we're doing here, you're going to have to find them, because that will destroy your engine, destroy your transmission if those go wandering down the bottom of the engine, down this lovely tunnel. That would be bad. You will cry. All right, moving on. Okay, getting ready to do the rear cylinder camshaft cap and camshaft. I wanted to point something out that may not be intuitively obvious. They don't mention pulling the plugs in the book, but I did go ahead and pull the plugs, because any resistance you feel when you're rotating the crankshaft is because you are compressing the air in the cylinder. If there's no spark plug, you can't compress, so it makes it a lot easier to rotate. On top of that, you're fighting, the camshaft is rotating, pressing against the cam follower, the rocker arm, which then is pressing against the top of the valve, trying to compress these massive springs. So you're working against all that to begin with. Also want to point out that now that the forward one's gone, but the chain is still in there, I've got a wire tie to keep me from losing the end of the cam chain prematurely. But what I really wanted to point out to you was down inside the cam chain tunnel. If I can get it to focus on there. There we go. You can see the crankshaft and the gearing, the teeth on the crankshaft you want to make sure that the chain stays engaged on the crankshaft as you turn it, and keep a little tension on it, so when you go to top dead center on the rear cylinder, that you're not bollocksing up a pile of chain over here in the front one. So, you know, your tensioner's free right there. So that's not going to help you. Keep it on there. Just keep a hold of it with a wire tie, your fingers, what have you, and keep a little tension on it as you're rotating the crankshaft counterclockwise until you hit the TR mark down inside, like I showed you before. Okay, I wanted to point something out here. The manual mentions it. Focus for me. There we go. This is my rear camshaft, rear cylinder camshaft. They are not interchangeable. There is this lovely machined groove here. If I can get it to focus. There we go. There we go. Now you can see them better. Lovely machine groove that is not present on the forward camshaft. It's not the same, so don't mix them up. Mark them. Got a nice big R on this one. Looks like it's from the factory, but I don't think they use the letter R in Japanese. So, I don't know. That might have been a previous repair. Who knows? In any event, just want to point that out. And in this case, both of my dowels stayed in the head. And also, just to point out again that the camshaft caps are not interchangeable. There's one for the front, one for the rear. Make sure you mark them and bag them. Hey, inspecting the bearing journals and inspecting the journals on the camshafts themselves, I'm finding that the wear is pretty even between front and rear, but both the front and the rear camshaft are just a hair above the service limit. So it may look like both of those are going to get replaced. We'll just have to see how the budget works out for gaskets and everything else, because my real problem's down the transmission, and I got to deal with that first, otherwise I'm not riding anywhere. I could always come back to the camshafts in 15 or 20,000 miles and they'll be under service limit, but right now they're just a tick above it. So be sure to check your camshafts on the journals. That'd be this portion and this portion of the camshaft. Better to show you. So this portion and this portion of the camshaft. You want to check it with a micrometer. I'm using a beam micrometer, digital micrometer. It's not really the right one. It should be a precision micrometer, but that's awful close. It'll be, it'll be close to correct. And I'm about 20 thou over from the service limit, so it's got a little ways to go, but not much. And then those will have to be replaced. Okay, looks like the heads are next. A word about removing the heads, particularly loosening the head nuts here and here and so forth. They're tight. You generally don't want to use an impact wrench on those, however. An impact gun is going to really hammer the crap out of the fastener as well as the stud, and you may get treated to that sickening sound of a snapping stud, and you don't know where it's going to snap. The most likely place for a fastener, a long fastener like this, okay, to snap is in the threaded region. You'd think that would happen up here where you're applying all the force, but it's threaded on the other end as well. Unless you want to be digging a piece of a flush snapped fastener out of the block, do it by hand. The best advice I can give you is when you apply pressure with either a breaker bar or a ratchet, is to hit it hard with the palm of your hand. And just keep doing it. And just go through it like you're a Karate Kid trying to do a speed break. You'll eventually hear a few little snaps, and it'll break itself free, and the rest of it doesn't come off too hard. Okay, and our cylinder head is off. Down here in a bucket, draining upside down to get all the oil out of the head. We've got a pretty heavily carboned up combustion chamber. Going to get that cleaned up. I think I might send the heads out to be done. The piston itself, this is the head gasket here, which of course needs to be replaced. I don't see any evidence where the gasket itself has any breakthrough between the combustion chamber and the cooling channels. It all looks nice, so no worries about a warped head or a blown gasket or anything. Looking at that piston, man, she's running a little rich, I think. Just my opinion. Okay. So that's all there is to that. You can see the cam guide and the cam chain tensioner very easily now. A whole lot easier to see the tensioner assembly at the back of the cam chain tunnel there. This is your head oil pipe, which brings oil up from below into the head. And so we're moving on. Ready to do the rear one now. We'll get that off, set it aside, and then we'll talk about pulling the cylinder sleeve off. And that might just be enough for today, because I need to start making up a parts list of stuff as far as gaskets and so forth, and things that I see that are worn. The air suction valves are bagged and tagged that normally sit here. I'm going to get, of course, new gaskets, new valve cover gasket. So once that's new, I might just replace the air suction valve too. I haven't decided. Those can be cleaned. But this being a rubber product, it's been sitting in there getting hardened for 14 years. This is an 06. So virtually anything made out of rubber inside this thing, unless it's not available, it's getting replaced. So, next step, pull off the rear cylinder head, and then we'll work on the cylinder sleeves. Just wanted to point out the difference between the upper and the lower head gaskets. On the left is the upper, and on the bottom, or excuse me, to the right is the lower. And there is a slight difference between them. I always want to take photos of anything that's got a difference in it between one side and another, top and bottom, front and rear. And once you overlap them, you can really see, even though the holes have to line up, obviously, for the studs to pass through, you can see the difference in the other passages. The cam chain tunnel is considerably narrower at the bottom than it is at the top, of course. That makes sense. Just wanted to point out there is a difference and take a picture of it so that later, whether or not I remember which is which, I'll have photographic evidence. So the cylinder sleeve is off now, and there's the piston all by itself. As Jack Sparrow would say, all by his onesie. No significant looking damage anywhere around it. And the cylinder sleeve looks pretty good too. Cleaned it up a little bit. What I'd be looking for and concerned about, that's my cam chain tunnel, so this lays forward like this, so if I'm going to look for wear, I'm going to look on the front side of the cylinder sleeve for scratching or scoring. Indicates being starved for oil at some point, and it really looks good. Really looks clean. So one less thing to worry about. So we'll get this cleaned up before it goes back in. I was going to do the rear head before pulling that, but since it was already loose, I gave it one little tap and it popped right off for me, so went ahead and did that first. Now we'll do the rear. Okay, well, rear side's off, front side's off, nothing but studs sticking up. A cursory inspection down inside the gearbox doesn't really show me anything other than the fact that there's a little wear spot right there, and you can just see it. See if I can zoom in on it. There's a little wear spot on a coolant tube there, and I'm not sure, I don't see any witness mark on the bottom of the piston skirt where it was hitting, so I'm not sure what was scrubbing on that, if anything in particular. And so yeah, that's where we're at. Don't forget to keep track of your dowels, folks. Bag them, tag them, mark them so you don't misplace where they go, where they came from. Rear cylinder doesn't look any worse than the front. In fact, if anything, it looks a little better. Inside of that combustion chamber looks pretty much identical to the front. So I still haven't found my smoking gun yet, but I did find some chunks of some black stuff, and I don't know quite what it is. That could be road gravel, I'm not sure, but that right there is definitely a little chunk of Babbitt, a little piece of steel or aluminum, and I don't know where it came from. I simply found it sitting right there. Yep, right there. So where it came from, I couldn't really tell you, but we're not there yet. So I've got to continue the teardown tomorrow. Will be the sides coming off, side covers coming off, alternator coming off, rotor, so forth. And then we'll really get down to it, be able to split the crankcase, layer underside, split the crankcase, and see if we've got a damaged bearing, see if we've got damaged transmission gears. Don't know. We'll find out. Still a mystery at this point. But I'm getting dirty and having fun. So good night from Belmont.